Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. This webinar is entitled The Untapped Potential of Supporting Learning Outside School, Evidence from a Randomized Control Trial in Rwanda. This webinar is brought to you by the Global Reading Network and USAID. The webinar was organized by Kimberly Folds at the Global Reading Network and presented by Carol Deshano da Silva at Save the Children, as well as myself, Elliot Friedlander from Stanford University. Due to technical difficulties, this version to which you are currently listening is a re-recording of the live webinar presented on October 26, 2016. During the live version, attendees posed questions during the presentation. This current recording will incorporate answers to those questions directly into the presentation. In today's webinar, we will first hear briefly about Save the Children's Literacy Boost program and its broader approach to literacy programming around the world. Following the Literacy Boost overview, I will present findings from a longitudinal randomized control trial. So first, we will describe Save the Children's approach to literacy action and the Literacy Boost program in more detail. These 3 slides were originally presented by Carol da Silva. Literacy Boost is a program developed by Save the Children US in 2008. It was developed in response to research and evaluations from across the developing world that showed that children were struggling to learn to read. Literacy Boost is made up of 3 core components. The first component is called teacher training. In this component, teachers in early primary levels receive regular in-service teacher training on ways to improve reading pedagogy. Teachers come together, learn about ways to teach a specific skill such as vocabulary, practice teaching that skill, and share lesson plans with each other. A few weeks later, teachers come back together to discuss what worked well in their actual classrooms before learning about a new skill. The teacher training sessions are not a replacement for existing curricula. Rather, program designers in each country adapt the sessions to map directly onto the existing curricula and ensure that the content of the trainings is culturally and contextually relevant to the local environment. The second component is called community action. This component contains a menu of activities that implementers may choose from to implement in communities and villages in which Save the Children works. Activities include reading awareness workshops, where family members, both those who can read and those who cannot, gather to learn ways about how to support children's learning at home. Another activity is reading buddies. In reading buddies, skilled readers are paired with younger children who are just learning to read, so that those young learners can share books with their more skilled peers. Reading camps is also another activity. It's sometimes also referred to as reading clubs. And in reading camps, children gather in weekly meetings that are led by local volunteers. The children gather to play games that involve reading and writing and literacy in general. At reading clubs, children also use locally available resources to make simple reading materials to take home. The community action component relies on resources and personnel in the community to directly help children learning. Finally, Save the Children regularly conducts summative assessment to understand how Literacy Boost impacts learners' reading skills. The Literacy Boost approach represents Save the Children's life-wide learning approach to education. A life-wide learning approach entails supporting children to learn both within the school walls, but also during the majority of a child's year when they are not in school. Life-wide learning seeks to enhance children's learning opportunities from the moment they are born and throughout their life. Recently, Save the Children released a document outlining 8 principles that contribute to successful literacy programming. The 8 principles are seen in this slide, and more details on them can be found by following the link at the bottom of the slide. As Literacy Boost is an early grades reading program, as it works primarily with primary schools and primary school students, it really focuses on 6 of these 8 principles. Other efforts that Save the Children puts forward for children that are too young to attend primary school addresses the first principle, which is start early. And the last principle, the policy principle, comes into play when the evidence that Literacy Boost generates is used to inform policy decisions. To date, Literacy Boost has been implemented in over 30 countries around the world and has reached millions of children to encourage better learning. For more information on Literacy Boost, on the 8 principles of effective literacy action, and Save the Children's life-wide learning approach to education, please contact Carol De Silva via the contact details we provide later. This was the final slide that Carol presented during the live webinar. We now turn to the presentation of Literacy Boost in Rwanda. So we will now look at the randomized control trial of Literacy Boost in Rwanda. This project is the result of many, many partners. The research was conducted by a team from Stanford University under the supervision of the principal investigator, Professor Claude Goldenberg, as well as co-researchers at the Education Board, Rwanda Education Board, under the leadership of Janvier Gasana, the Director General of the Rwanda Education Board. Today's webinar is a broad overview of the ongoing study, which started in Rwanda in 2013 and has involved thousands of participants to date. For more details on the project, there are several resources you can refer to, including a PDF version of this presentation, which contains a large appendix with different slides. And also you can refer to the complete impact evaluation, which is available at several different places online. We'll provide links to the report at the end of the webinar. Before I go further, I want to briefly describe what is meant by the term randomized control trial. A randomized control trial is a type of scientific experiment that estimates the impact of a new treatment or intervention. In a randomized control trial, participants are randomly assigned to either a treatment group or a control group. Participants in the treatment group receive the intervention under investigation. Participants in the control group do not receive any treatment, but conduct their lives in a business-as-usual manner. After a certain amount of time, both groups are compared to see whether there are significant differences between those groups. If there are significant differences, it can be inferred that the treatment under investigation caused that difference to occur. Randomized control trials are often referred to as the gold standard of quantitative research into how a treatment can cause observed change. Many education interventions across the world seek to improve children's learning experience in school. This can include improving teaching, improving the curriculum, improving textbooks, and other school-based improvements. We call these school-based efforts a school-only approach to supporting learning. As mentioned earlier, Save the Children strives to extend learning opportunities far beyond the school walls, and we refer to this as a life-wide learning approach. This study is designed to compare the school-only and life-wide learning approaches to improving education. In Rwanda, school is open for 180 days a year. Instruction is provided for 4 hours each day of those 180 days. Using this official calendar, we calculated that students in Rwanda can benefit from school-based supports to learning during 14% of their waking year. Therefore, students in both the school-only approach and the life-wide learning approach would benefit from school-based supports for a maximum of 14% of their waking year. We say this is a maximum as it does not take into account school closures, holidays, exam periods, and other reasons that may interfere with instruction. The difference in the two approaches occurs outside the school walls. In the school-only approach, children's learning potential is generally ignored or goes largely unsupported during an estimated 86% of their waking year. However, in a life-wide learning approach, children can receive the support of families and communities when they are not in school. A life-wide learning approach, therefore, has the potential to reach children throughout their day and throughout their year. Now, the research questions of this study are implicit in this graphic. Specifically, the research questions were, what is the benefit of using a school-only approach to focus on 14% of a child's waking year? And then secondly, what is the added benefit of a life-wide learning approach? Can families and communities be effectively supported to help children better use the 86% of their time when they are not being taught in school? This study will delve into these two broad questions to better understand what is the best way to support children's learning. In Rwanda, working with the Ministry of Education and the Rwanda Education Board, Save the Children International and its partner organization, Umuhuza, identified one of the 30 districts in Rwanda in which to implement Literacy Boost. This district was made up of 21 sectors, and there were about 100 primary schools spread out across those 21 sectors. We randomized those 21 sectors into one of three groups. The first group of sectors we refer to as the control group. Neither Save the Children nor its local partner organization Umuhuza led any activities in these sectors during 2014 and 2015. The second group is the Teacher Training Group, or the TT Group. Teachers in these 7 sectors were offered Literacy Boost's teacher training component only. Schools also received book banks full of local language storybooks. All school-based activities were led or supported by Save the Children staff. The final group we refer to as the LB group, the Literacy Boost group. It received both teacher training and community action. This means that, similar to the teacher training group, the Literacy Boost group received the teacher training sessions as well as the school-based book banks. But also, families and communities in the Literacy Boost group were offered workshops on how to support children's reading, and communities were guided in how to lead reading clubs for children and hold reading festivals. These activities were led by community volunteers who were trained by a local non-governmental organization named Umuhuza. Umuhuza is a partner organization of Save the Children. Therefore, the control group represents a school-only approach to education. The control group received school-only supports from the government. Now, it's important to note that one of these supports from the government included the Language Learning and Literacy Initiative. This initiative, which is commonly referred to as L3, was implemented in partnership with the international NGO EDC and supported by USAID. L3 activities included curriculum revisions, rewriting of textbooks, and also revising other curricular materials. The L3 initiative also created interactive audio lessons for children in lower primary levels. The L3 initiative and its activities occurred simultaneously with Literacy Boost, and L3 was actually uniformly implemented across all of the 3 groups in our study. Since L3 was implemented uniformly across all the treatment groups, we are unable to state categorically how L3 may have impacted our findings. We don't have a comparison group to look at to see what would be the impact of our program in the absence of L3. However, if L3 improved reading instruction and learning, one possibility is that the presence of L3 would diminish any possible impact we would see from Literacy Boost. That is, in the absence of L3, it is possible that the findings that I will show you later would actually be greater because the schools in the control group were not receiving support via the L3 initiative. Now, the teacher training group received everything that the control group did, as well as the extra teacher training and reading materials at school. So we can say that this is also a school-only approach, but it is enhanced by Save the Children's teacher training activities. And finally, Literacy Boost represents the life-wide learning approach. We used both quantitative and qualitative research to understand the impact of literacy boost treatments. First, we conducted reading assessments at several points in time. In 2013, we randomly selected and assessed more than 2,000 Primary 1 students. Note that Primary 1 is the equivalent of Grade 1 in the United States. We came back 2 years later and found more than 80% of the students that we found in 2013, and we assessed that 80% of students again in 2015. We wanted to understand how literacy boost impacted teachers and classrooms. To do this, we asked teachers to take a survey in 2013 and again in 2015. Many teachers filled out the survey during both years, which allows us to conduct a longitudinal and a cross-sectional analysis of teacher survey results. We also observed a random sample of teachers who participated in the survey to better understand changes in teaching practice. The teacher training sessions included techniques to create a child-friendly and print-rich environment. To see whether these techniques were put into practice, we photographed a random selection of Primary 1, Primary 2, and Primary 3 classrooms in 95 schools across the district, and we compared the print environment of these classrooms. We also visited the homes of a representative 20% of students who participated in the reading assessment. During those home visits, we surveyed their family about the literacy ecology of the home, the literacy practices, literacy knowledge, literacy beliefs and habits that family members engaged in. Lastly, we conducted qualitative observations of 2 randomly selected children in 2013, who we refer to with the pseudonyms of Flora and Jolly. These observations were collected by Professor Michael Tusime, a lecturer at the University of Rwanda College of Education. In addition, at Endline, in consultation with Dr. Tusime and our other partners, we purposefully selected 2 more students who lived in literacy boost sectors. Using their Endline reading assessment data, we selected 1 student, who we refer to as Marie, who still could not read, despite being in school for over 3 years, and despite having lived in a literacy boost sector. We also selected Daniel because he had made marked gains in reading over the course of the intervention, and we wanted to compare Marie and Daniel to understand why one of these students made significant gains in their reading, while the other one remains a struggling reader. We now turn to the analysis and the findings. The analysis that we used is called an intention to treat analysis. It looks at whether simply offering the activities led to changes in the different groups. This analysis does not take into account whether individuals actually participated in the activities. It simply looks at whether the activities were available and how that availability is related to changes that we see in children's reading. This intention to treat analysis is the most relevant analysis for policymakers and other educators who need to make decisions on how to best improve learning. It also provides the most conservative estimate of impact for a given treatment. When I say conservative, I mean it provides the lowest estimate of impact for a given treatment. We will look first at the results from the reading assessment. Results are reported in a measure called an effect size. We use effect sizes so that we can compare different outcomes on a common scale. Now, the outcomes that we're going to compare on this graph, there are 4 of them. The first is an outcome that we call oral comprehension. This outcome measured students' skills in speaking and in listening. These skills, speaking and listening, have been shown in research to be important precursors for later successful reading. The second outcome we call the basic literacy threshold. Students earned a 1 on this threshold if they could perform 3 very, very basic tasks. They earned a 0 if they could not perform all 3 of these tasks. The 3 tasks included identifying 75% of the letters of the alphabet in Kinyarwanda. Kinyarwanda is the name of the language that is spoken in Rwanda. The second task is whether they could write a very, very simple common word, at least one word. And then the third task is whether they could read a very simple decodable word. For more on this outcome, please refer to the full report and the appendix to this slideshow. For children who met the basic literacy threshold, for those students who scored a 1 on the basic literacy threshold, we also assessed their reading fluency, which is the number of words that they correctly read in 1 minute, and we also measured their reading comprehension. I will show you next how the teacher training and literacy boost groups performed in comparison to the control group. What this means is that we set the scores of the control group to 0, as you can see in the graph in the red lines. This does not mean the control group scored 0. Rather, it will show how much better the teacher training and literacy boost groups performed. Let's look at the difference between the teacher training group and the control group first. This is the difference between the school-only approach that we saw in the control group and the enhanced school-only approach of the literacy boost group. Of the teacher training group. You can see that the teacher training group scored better than the control group in every outcome. However, we are only sure that the difference we observe is statistically significantly different for the reading comprehension outcome. That is, the differences that we see here could have been just a result of chance sampling of different students. The only difference that showed up statistically significantly different, again, is reading comprehension. This information, these yellow bars tell us that teacher training caused students' reading comprehension scores to increase. Now, what about the literacy boost group? What was the impact of the lifeline learning approach? In 3 of the 4 outcomes, literacy boost students performed statistically significantly better than control students. This indicates that literacy boosts cause children to read more fluently and take more meaning from the text that they read. It also helped them with their oral comprehension skills. The life-wide learning approach seems to be the most impactful in helping children's early reading skills. Now, there's one outcome here that we observed no significant differences across groups, and that was the number of students who passed the basic literacy threshold. Nearly 1/3 of the sample of students failed to meet this threshold. This is very troubling, especially considering that we tested students in 2013 when they were at the end of grade 1 of primary 1. And we came back 2 years later and tested them again. This means that students were in school for almost 3 years. 31% of these students who had been in school for almost 3 years couldn't do 3 very, very basic tasks that were required to pass the basic literacy threshold. So while we see a very encouraging effect size for literacy boost in the green bars in this graph, there's still a long way to go to make sure all students are becoming successful readers. During the live webinar, 2 questions came up regarding this 31% of students who failed to meet the basic literacy threshold. One general question asked why 31% of the students failed to meet the threshold. There are likely many contributing factors to this, including undiagnosed learning disabilities, possibly physical factors like poor eyesight, or environmental factors such as little support at home or few reading materials with which students can practice their reading skills. I'll discuss one other potential reason behind this large portion of non-readers later in the presentation. But I encourage you to refer to the Endline report, to the impact evaluation, as it goes into much greater detail on this finding. During the live webinar, another participant suggested that teachers' difficulties with phonemic awareness instruction may have contributed to the 31% who failed to meet the threshold. This is an interesting idea, But from our data and from the existing research with which we are familiar, we are unable to make any claims about the role of phonemic awareness instruction. While phonemic awareness has been shown to be an important precursor skill to successful reading in the English language, which has a very complex orthography, there is still no conclusive evidence on the role of phonemic awareness in helping children to learn to read in less complex, in more shallow orthographies such as Spanish or Kinyarwanda. A recent article published by Claude Goldenberg, the principal investigator of this study, looked at Spanish language learners and children learning to read in Spanish and suggested that phonemic awareness may not be a critical component of learning to read in Spanish, which has a shallow orthography similar to Kinyarwanda. But in summary, there's a clear need for more research on this topic to understand the role of phonemic awareness in orthographies that are not as complex as English. In addition to the literacy skills, we had another important finding that emerged from the data. Remember that we assessed students in Primary 1 in 2013, and then we returned 2 years later to assess them again. We recorded their primary level in 2015 when we returned, and using that data, we were able to, with simple algebra, to calculate annual rates of promotion and annual rates of children repeating primary levels. What I will show you are the percentage of students who repeated a primary level each year, and the percentage who successfully graduated to the next primary level. We will ignore the 20% of students that we did not locate to assess in 2015, because we cannot say for certain which level they might have been studying in. As you look at these findings, please keep in mind that these are very reliable data, because even though they come from a small geographic region. We say that they are very reliable because the data collectors, the assessors, went into each school and into each classroom and collected students, and they directly observed which primary class students were studying. So in the control group, we found that each year, 44% of our sample repeated their school year. This means that if you had 100 Primary 1 students this year, you would only expect 66 of them to make it to Primary 2 next year. And then in 2 years, only 31 students of the original 100 that you have in Primary 1 will reach Primary 3 2 years later. This repetition rate also does not account for the 20% of the sample that were missing in 2015. If any of that 20% had dropped out or had not reached Primary 3 or Primary 2, it means that the 44% repetition rate might be a low estimate of the actual number of children who do not progress normally through the early primary levels. Now, this high rate of repetition is not a phenomenon that is limited to Rwanda. Research by Luis Crouch and others at RTI show that high repetition rates likely exist in many low-income countries across the world. When students repeat early levels of primary school, when they're repeating grade 1, grade 2, grade 3, it represents a massive waste of resources. More importantly, repetition cannot be good for children's self-esteem, for their confidence in themselves as learners, and for parents' confidence that investing in education is a good investment. This repetition finding, this 44% annual rate of repetition, is an important one. And let's see what the impact of treatment was on the literacy boost and teacher training groups for repetition. The repetition rates for literacy boost and teacher training groups were identical, so we're presenting them as one number, which is the lower bar in this graphic. Compared to the control group, students in the literacy boost and teacher training groups repeated significantly less often. We believe that literacy boost and teacher training's effect on reducing repetition is actually higher That is, it has a greater impact on reducing repetition rates. We think this is true because students were assessed in 2013, but the treatment activities did not start until 2014. That means that students in 2013, at the end of the year, were either promoted to the next grade, to primary 2, or they repeated a year without having had any exposure to treatment activities. So in theory, the treatment activities would have a greater impact on repetition, but we don't see it here because children had a chance to repeat before the start of treatment. We had interesting findings from the teacher study as well. Our results indicate that teacher knowledge, teacher beliefs, and teacher practices all significantly increased in comparison to the control group. Remember that all teachers in all schools, including the control group, also participated and hopefully benefited from the L3 initiative. So the significant differences we see here are the impact of Literacy Boost teacher sessions, teacher training sessions, in addition to any impact that L3 may have had. I would like to spend more time discussing these findings, but unfortunately I don't have enough time to fit it into this webinar. I encourage you to refer to the full report for more details. We also collected photographs of classroom walls, and they revealed some interesting findings. Here are some examples from a range of classrooms. Photos were coded using a visual estimation of coverage. 2 members of the Stanford research team looked at the photos and approximated the amount of wall space in each photo. Each photo was assigned a score for the amount of wall space that was covered. The scoring procedure is also detailed in the Endline report, as well as our statistical analyses of the photo scores. These 3 photos were coded as having no coverage, having half coverage, and having 100% coverage. We coded the classroom photos without knowledge of which group the classrooms were assigned to. And then we looked at across the groups at the average scores. In control group, 53% of the classrooms had no literacy material coverage at all. And only about 15% had half coverage or more. Remember, these photographs were taken towards the end of the year in classrooms of primary 1, primary 2, and primary 3 students. So this means that half of the walls that students look at have nothing on them in the control group. The scenario is very different in the Literacy Boost and teacher training groups. In those groups, only about 11% of the walls had no coverage, while the majority of walls had half or full coverage. This shows that teachers trained by Save the Children staff displayed more literacy materials in their classrooms. Our photo evidence shows that teacher training had a substantial impact on the everyday instructional practice of literacy teachers. The effect sizes for these literacy materials on the walls are huge. They approach 2.0 in size. Now, a question raised during the live webinar concerned the relationship between print coverage and student outcomes. Unfortunately, we were not able to conduct this analysis since we took a random sample of classrooms and did not have the data to link students to classrooms. We did try to link teacher outcomes to student outcomes, but ran into difficulties there as well. The difficulties stem from the fact that in Rwanda, teachers move from class to class throughout the school day. This means that a primary 1 classroom may have 5 or 6 different teachers for all their subjects in the course of one single day. We therefore tried to aggregate teacher scores at the school level to take an average teacher score, and to aggregate student scores at the school level as well, and compare those average scores. This analysis, however, did not yield any significant findings, and we believe it's due to the limited sample size that results of taking school averages. Finally, we turn to the impact of the life-wide learning approach on the 86% of the time a child is awake but is not in school. We found that families in literacy sectors had improved home literacy ecologies. For more on what we mean by literacy ecology of the home and community, please refer to the full report. We also found a significant correlation between improvements in the literacy ecology of the home and student learning outcomes. The literacy ecology of the home is a multifaceted concept. Different facets of the literacy ecology were associated with different student outcomes. One factor, child interest and engagement in reading activities, showed an interesting relationship to reading outcomes. Children's interest and engagement were significantly related to every reading outcome and every learning outcome that we measured. Now, this is not a causal finding. That is, we did not randomly assign different children to have different levels of interest and then tested outcomes. That wouldn't actually be possible. But what we do see is a highly significant and consistent relationship between child interest and engagement in learning outcomes. To us, this points to the role of creatively and actively engaging children in reading and of building their interest in reading, and how this may have this building their interest, this actively engaging in children, how that may have a positive impact on children's reading development. And this needs to happen both in school and outside of school. It needs to happen through a life-wide learning approach. The last source of evidence, the last data set that we collected, comes from observations of the literacy ecology of 4 children. These observations were conducted by Dr. Michael Tusime. In this current webinar, I will highlight findings from the observations from the homes and villages of 2 of the 4 children that we observed. But I encourage everyone interested to read the findings from the baseline and the endline and the full impact evaluation. These observations are written up without any statistics, but are presented as in-depth qualitative descriptions of the role of literacy in the lives of 4 children. And the write-up is very interesting and provides interesting ideas about possibly explanatory mechanisms for the reasons we see the findings that we do. The first of the children I'll talk about in this webinar is Marie. Marie was purposefully selected for observations because she lived in the literacy sector. But after 2 years of treatment, she still could not read. When Dr. Tusime arrived in the village on the first day of observations, he quickly got a sense why Marie might be still struggling to read. These are the first 5 sentences that Marie's father said to Dr. Tusime. "Why didn't you select Marie's elder sister? She is the one who is bright. Marie is Umuskwa at school. She is Umuskwa. I don't know why she is the one they selected." Now, the word Umuskwa is really critical here. It doesn't have an exact translation in English. However, in Rwanda it is a derogatory word, and it can be translated, close approximations are dull, stupid, or intellectually disabled. Now, these first 5 sentences clearly show that Marie does not receive support in her learning from her father. Over the course of the observation period, Dr. Tusime observed her mother also using the word Umuskwa to refer to Marie in Marie's presence. This happened over 3 days. He heard this word over 20 times. So Marie clearly lacks parental support, parental encouragement for learning. And this lack of support can only serve to inhibit her interest in reading and her growth as a reader. When speaking with Marie directly, Dr. Tusime discovered just how well Marie had internalized that lack of support. Dr. Tusime asked Marie, "Why is reading important?" And Marie responded that knowing how to read makes you clever. He asked her, "Why is it important to be clever?" Marie replied that by knowing how to read, you stop being Umuskwa. Finally, when he asked her what she wanted to become when she finished school, Marie said that she was too stupid, she was too dull to finish school. Remember, we purposefully selected Marie to find out why she remained a non-reader, even after 2 years of being exposed to Literacy Boost and after being enrolled in primary school for 3 years. The answer behind why she remained a non-reader that these 2 slides provides is rather unambiguous. Her home environment did not provide her the support. It did not foster the curiosity. It didn't encourage her to learn to the best of her abilities. No amount of school-only intervention is going to change Marie's home environment. It's only through a lifelong learning approach that Marie can experience enhanced instruction in school and enhanced learning experiences in school, but also receive the support that we would hope all children receive during their entire waking year. Marie is just one child of the thousands that we assess. We don't know how many children in our sample have home environments similar to Marie. In the full report, we also visit Jolly and Daniel, who have very supportive families. So I don't want you to walk away thinking that all children in Rwanda are unsupported. There are some incredible families out there doing wonderful things to help their children to learn as to their best possible ability. But we present observations from Marie's home to suggest one possible explanation behind that 31% of students who could not meet the basic literacy threshold. The other child I'll speak about today is Flora. Now, Flora we observed for a week in 2013, and for 3 or 4 days again in 2015. Flora also lived in a literacy boost sector. In 2013, Flora couldn't read or even recite half of her alphabet. The only book she had at home was her school notebook, and that was very dusty, beaten up, and in generally poor condition. In 2013, her parents reported never reading stories to her, or not even having time to read due to the household chores and agricultural responsibilities that were required to keep the family fed and clothed and housed. In 2015, however, we see tremendous improvements. Flora's mother tells Dr. Tusime that in the past, our children had nothing to read during the holidays. Now, Flora has managed to borrow some books and reads many books with interesting and funny stories. The children keep laughing when they are reading, and we also laugh when they tell us about the stories. Suddenly, a household with very low levels of reading in 2013 is sharing books with each other. And this activity of sharing books comes with joy. The family is laughing. Flora, who in 2013 spent her holidays fetching water and cooking and cleaning, now is engaging in fun learning activities at home. In the full report, there is much more evidence of the positive impact that Literacy Boost had in this one household. And though one household cannot represent the thousands that we assessed, this evidence gives us some insight into the possible explanations for the positive impact we saw on children's reading scores. Now, this is an encouraging quote, but even in this quote, we see that Literacy Boost still has more work to do, that we all have more work to do. And this comes from a piece of the quote that I did not read. Flora's mother had reported attending some of the reading awareness workshops, but she still hasn't internalized the idea that any reading practice Flora can engage in is beneficial to Flora's reading. Note that her mother says, but she really does not benefit from these stories otherwise. So while Literacy Boost has significantly impacted Flora's home, the work of encouraging life-wide learning and of helping families and communities to enable their children to capitalize on the 86% of a child's waking year when they are not in school is still far from complete. Before providing some concluding thoughts, I want to leave you with one last quote from Flora. Dr. Tsutsime asked Flora about her experience in the reading clubs, and this is what she replied. At reading clubs, we learn new things, and when we reach at school, we are able to explain to other students who have difficulties. Students who attend reading clubs have improved their literacy skills. I love it when I am able to explain things to other students. This quote really speaks to the need to embrace a life-wide learning approach to supporting learning. Program implementers tapped knowledgeable readers in the community to lead these fun activities during the reading clubs. And as Flora demonstrates, there is a great demand for these activities in the communities. There is great engagement with these activities and with life-wide learning opportunities in general. These activities offer a greater potential for the positive impact of reading practice, fun reading activities, to be passed on through peers to really help all children learn to their maximum potential. Rwanda has come a very long way in its efforts to provide education for all. The progress of the Rwanda Education Board and the Ministry of Education is remarkable. An example of this is the L3 initiative and the more recent new drive to create a competencies-based curriculum. The findings of this study were only finalized and presented for the Rwanda Education Board in late July 2016. The principal investigator, Claude Goldenberg, and the project manager, Catherine Galloway, have also shared the findings with education partners in Rwanda. Plans are currently underway to create a multi-day forum with educators and policymakers in Rwanda to fully examine the expansive findings in the report. It is the hope that this forum will lead to concrete policy actions to improve children's learning in Rwanda. But how can these findings be applied to the broader challenges facing not just Rwanda, but scores of developing countries across the world as they strive to ensure quality learning for all children? Generalizations made from randomized control trials must be made cautiously, because contextual factors can alter program impacts in different settings. But the overall general finding of this randomized control trial of Literacy Boost in Rwanda is generalizable. That finding is that a life-wide learning approach, one that maximizes children's learning opportunities throughout their day and year, holds the greatest promise at helping all children fulfill their learning potential. I'm going to say that again. A life-wide learning approach which maximizes children's learning opportunities throughout their waking day and their waking year holds the greatest promise for helping all children fulfill their learning potential. It is highly unlikely that continuing to narrowly focus on the 14% of a child's waking year when they are in school will dramatically improve learning. All of us working to improve education, including ministers of education, policymakers, donor organizations, and others, must acknowledge the limits of the school-only approach. We must find ways to maximize life-wide learning opportunities around the world so that the constant learning opportunities that occur during 100% of the child's waking life do not go to waste. As Dr. Amy Jo Dowd and her colleagues at Save the Children have been saying and have been writing about for years, a life-wide learning approach to education is our best bet for equitable educational outcomes. Life-wide learning approaches have the potential to reach all children, from newborns to children with disabilities to children who may never have enrolled in school at all. A life-wide learning approach promises the greatest possibility of actually achieving a quality education for all. Answers to the questions that were presented during the live webinar have been incorporated into this current recording. This slide and the next contains the links where you can find more information on the study. Thank you for listening to this webinar, and thanks to the Global Reading Network again for hosting it. We could not have conducted this research without our partners at Save the Children International in Rwanda, Save the Children UK, Save the Children US, Umuhuza, without our co-researcher, the Director General of the Rwanda Education Board, Jean-Diego Sana, without the oversight of the Rwanda National Ethics Committee, and without the support of funders like Comic Relief and the Bernard and Irene Schwartz Foundation. My team at Stanford University included Professor Claude Goldenberg, Saima Malik, Sen Zhou, Angela Sun, Catherine Galloway, Kiju Cha, Erin Rod, Nicole Arshin, Daniel Klazik, and Rachel Baker. We received guidance from Professors Ed Hartle and Thomas Dean. We are incredibly grateful for the generosity of our participants, for the time and information provided by thousands of students and hundreds of families, teachers, and community members who participated in this study. For further information about the randomized control trial, please visit the websites on this slide or contact us at the email addresses provided.